If that little girl lives, I don't need anyone to remember my name. As the words slice through the chaos like a whisper no one hears. They belong to a man leaning against the sterile white wall of a hospital corridor. His janitor's apron is smeared with bleach and old paint, but his eyes burn with a quiet certainty. No one notices him. No one ever does. Inside the trauma room, the world is collapsing. 8 years old, a little girl lies on the operating table, her chest rising in shallow, broken gasps. Machines shriek warnings. Nurses rush in waves, pushing carts of silver instruments, bags of fluid, wires, and needles. The lead surgeon shouts, "She's crashing! We're losing her!" The girl's mother, Ava Whitmore, 30 years old, the youngest CEO in the Fortune 500, a woman used to commanding boardrooms and moving markets, stands frozen at the glass, her knuckles white against the window. She is helpless. For once, all the wealth, all the power, all the walls she built cannot stop the cruelest clock of all, the one ticking inside her daughter's fragile body. The doctors move fast. They try every drug, every machine, every desperate trick. But the monitor keeps screaming flat lines, then erratic spikes, then flat again. "She won't make it without compatible blood," a nurse yells. "We've tested every donor on the list. Nothing works." The silence that follows is suffocating. Then, without anyone asking, a small vial appears at the nurse's elbow. She doesn't even notice at first, too panicked, until her hand closes around it. The label is handwritten, smudged, just 2 words: Universal Veteran. "Run it," the surgeon barks, because there's no time to question miracles when a child is dying. Moments later, the crimson fluid courses into the girl's veins. The room holds its breath. 1 beat, 2. Then the impossible. The girl's chest rises stronger. The shrill monitor levels into rhythm. A fragile heartbeat steadies. Against every prediction, against every chart and protocol, she comes back. The doctors stare in disbelief. What the hell kind of blood is this? On the other side of the glass, Ava drops to her knees. Her tears hit the floor like shattering glass. Her daughter is alive. She doesn't know why. She doesn't know who. She only knows she is not ready to lose the only family she has left. And yet, the man responsible for this miracle does not step forward. Harris, the janitor, the ghost in the hallway, simply lowers his head. The faceless narrator enters, calm, steady, almost like time itself speaking. It came from a man no one saw, a man no one remembered. His name had been erased, his uniform folded away, his sacrifices buried under years of silence. But in this moment, his blood carried the power to save the daughter of the most powerful woman in the country. And still, he asked for nothing. The scene lingers on Harris's hands, rough, scarred, veins marked by a lifetime of labor and loss. They are not the hands of a hero carved into marble. They are the hands of someone forgotten. But tonight, they hold the weight of destiny. A drop of blood falling in slow motion into the IV line. The monitor's jagged line straightening into rhythm. Ava's trembling fingers pressed against the glass. Harris turning away, blending back into the shadows of the corridor as if he was never there. They tried everything. Money, machines, the best doctors alive. But none of it was enough, until a single drop of blood from a man no one noticed changed everything. Tonight, the world almost lost a child. Instead, it gained a story that will echo through time. The camera, in the audience's mind, lingers on Ava rushing into the room, clutching her daughter's fragile hand, whispering, "Don't leave me, baby. Please don't leave me." The little girl, too weak to open her eyes, manages the faintest squeeze. Behind them, unnoticed, Harris slips out the back door into the cold night rain. If you've ever wondered whether one invisible life could still change the world, stay with this story. Because tonight is only the beginning. And by the time it ends, the man no one remembered will become unforgettable. Night always belonged to him. When the city lights dimmed and the towers of glass emptied of their ambitious tenants, Harrison came alive in the silence. Not in the way most men lived, with laughter, with companions, with the noise of belonging, but in the hush of corridors echoing with forgotten footsteps. His mop bucket squeaked on polished marble floors, his shoulders bent, head lowered, eyes always searching for stains no one else cared about. To most, he was background, a middle-aged janitor with long hair brushing his collar, a faded uniform beneath a fraying apron, his face rugged but anonymous. He carried himself like a man both present and absent, occupying space without demanding it. People passed him daily, yet remembered nothing. He was the kind of man you apologized to when you bumped into him, and then forgot he existed the moment you turned the corner. But Harrison had one constant light in his dim world, Elara, 8 years old, yet her eyes carried an ancient spark, the kind that unsettled adults and left them whispering. How does she know these things? She was sharp in ways that couldn't be explained. While other children clutched dolls, Elara carried books too heavy for her wrists, anatomy atlases, dog-eared medical journals scavenged from second-hand stores, and a little wooden box she never let out of sight. The box was worn smooth by her small fingers. Its brass hinges squeaked when opened, revealing a stethoscope wrapped in faded velvet and a folded note sealed in plastic. It had belonged to her mother, a woman Elara barely remembered, except through this relic. The note, written in soft, looping handwriting, contained just a few words. Listen with your heart, not just your ears. You'll know what others can't. Elara believed it. She said she could hear more than pulses when she pressed the stethoscope against someone's chest. She swore she could sense secrets buried in silence, like whispers only she was meant to catch. Harrison never told her she was wrong, maybe because deep down he suspected she was right. They lived quietly in a small apartment tucked behind the hospital's service entrance. The world saw a janitor and his peculiar daughter, but behind closed doors, they were a universe of two. Dinner was canned, soup warmed on a single burner. Evenings meant Elara reading aloud from medical texts, while Harrison listened, nodding, correcting gently. He never told her how much of what she said was far beyond her years, far beyond what even interns knew. He never explained why her knowledge felt familiar, as if inherited through blood. And every night, when Harrison left for work, Elara trailed close behind until the last possible step. She would sit in a corner of the hospital lobby, legs tucked beneath her, sketching diagrams of human hearts on scrap paper. Nurses laughed softly at the sight. Doctors brushed past, muttering, "Whose kid is this?" But none asked seriously. She was invisible too, though not by choice. There was, however, one man who noticed. Leon, the night guard. He was older than Harrison, with stiff knees and a gut that hung heavy over his belt. His job was simple: check the doors, patrol the empty hallways, and keep the peace. But over the years, he had developed a habit, a quiet one. He watched Harrison, not with suspicion, but with a curiosity he didn't voice aloud. From his security booth, Leon studied the janitor sweeping under fluorescent lights, moving with a rhythm almost military in precision. He noticed the way Harrison checked each fire exit like muscle memory, as if he'd once been drilled to never miss a corner. He noticed the posture, the reflexes, the way Harrison's eyes scanned a room as though assessing threats, not dust. Leon said nothing, but sometimes, when Harrison passed, he'd nod. Just once, a gesture that meant, "I see you, even if no one else does." It became a ritual. and though Harrison rarely lifted his head, he always gave a small nod back. For two invisible men, it was enough. One evening, Ilara wandered into the lobby holding her wooden box. She set it gently on the security desk, while Leon sipped his thermos of bitter coffee. "What's in there?" he asked, voice gravelly. Ilara lifted the lid with pride. The stethoscope gleamed under the flickering fluorescent light. "It was my mom's," she said softly. "She was a doctor. She said I could be one too someday." Leon leaned back, surprised. "A doctor, huh? That's a big dream." She shook her head firmly. "Not a dream. A plan." Something in the way she said it made Leon chuckle, not out of mockery, but out of respect. This little girl, barely taller than his desk, spoke like she had already charted her destiny. He looked past her, at Harrison pushing his mop down the hall, and for the first time Leon wondered. What kind of man raises a child like this? Later that night, when the corridors were hushed and the hospital sighed under the weight of its sleeping patients, Ilara sat cross-legged in the supply closet, where Harrison stored his tools. She placed the stethoscope against her own chest, eyes closed, lips parted in concentration. "I can hear her," she whispered. Harrison froze. "Hear who?" "Mom." The word was a blade through his heart. He turned away, pretending to rearrange bottles of cleaning solution, his jaw tight. "She says you're sad," Ilara continued, her voice barely more than breath. "But she says it's not your fault. She says, you saved lives once, before all this." Harrison swallowed hard, his hand trembling around the handle of his mop. He wanted to deny it, to laugh it off as a child's fantasy. But Ilara opened her eyes and looked straight into him, as if she could see past the years of silence, past the layers of shame and secrecy, straight into the wound he carried. And for the first time in years, Harrison felt exposed. Every invisible man carries a wound. Some bury it under anger, some drown it in noise. But Harrison carried his like a hidden scar, stitched beneath uniforms and silence. He had chosen obscurity, believing it was safer that way. Safer for him. Safer for her. Yet children have a way of unearthing what the world tries to forget. And through the eyes of Ilara, the janitor was not invisible. He was something more. Leon, from his booth, watched the father and daughter walking down the hall together, the man with shoulders bowed, the girl clutching her wooden box like a treasure chest. To others, they were nothing. But Leon felt it. He was witnessing something rare. The kind of story that begins in whispers before it shakes the earth. It began on an ordinary night, or as ordinary as nights could be in a hospital that never slept. The lab's machines hummed in their sterile rhythm, monitors glowing faint green in the dark, as if the building itself had a heartbeat. Ilara stood tiptoe against the glass window of the diagnostics room, her nose nearly pressed to it, eyes darting over the rows of numbers flashing across the blood panel. To anyone else, the display was a blur of medical jargon. But Ilara, with her restless curiosity and endless nights flipping through anatomy books, saw patterns. She noticed numbers where others saw static. She saw what didn't belong. "Dad," she whispered, tugging at Harrison's sleeve. "Look." Harrison was pushing his mop along the corridor nearby, head bent as always, his posture rehearsed for invisibility. But the tone in her voice made him pause. Slowly, reluctantly, he stepped toward the glass. On the screen, a patient's chart pulsed red. The markers were chaotic, irregular. To Ilara's untrained but gifted eye, it looked wrong. To Harrison's trained memory, it looked familiar. Too familiar. He froze. His breath slowed, caught halfway in his throat, and the mop handle tightened in his grip until his knuckles whitened. For a long moment, he said nothing. Ilara's eyes searched his face. "That's not normal, is it?" He wanted to lie, to tell her it was complicated, too advanced for her to understand. But then he saw the wooden box in her hands, the stethoscope coiled like a promise, and he knew there was no use pretending. "No," he said quietly. His voice was rough, as if pulled from a place he hadn't visited in years. It's not normal. For years, Harrison had buried that part of himself. Once, not so long ago, he had worn a different uniform. Not the faded janitor's smock, but the crisp white coat of a hematologist. He had studied the science of blood, decoding mysteries hidden in plasma and marrow, saving lives with his knowledge. He had been respected, trusted, until the day he chose truth over silence. He had uncovered falsified research, experiments, approved not for healing, but for profit. He had spoken up. He had trusted the system to protect integrity. Instead, it buried him. His license revoked, his reputation smeared, his name erased from journals. Overnight, he became not a healer, but a liability. A man easier forgotten than defended, and so he became invisible. But the blood on that screen, its chaotic rhythm, dragged everything back. Alara's voice was small, but sharp with insight. "You know what it means, don't you?" Harrison hesitated, then gave a slight nod. "Yes." Her eyes widened. "Because you used to be—" "Stop!" His tone was harsher than he intended. He glanced around, instinctively scanning for cameras, for ears in the shadows. Even now, after all these years, fear lived in his bones. "We don't talk about that." But Alara didn't look away. She had inherited more than his eyes, more than his sharp mind. She had inherited his stubbornness. "You were a doctor," she said. Not a question, a declaration. The words struck him like a gavel on stone. He turned away, jaw tight, chest heaving as if the air itself weighed heavy. He wanted to silence her, to bury the truth again. But he couldn't. Not when her voice trembled, not with accusation, but with admiration. "Dad," she whispered, "if you know, why don't you help them?" He closed his eyes, because he had tried once, because trying again could destroy them both, because being good had cost him everything. They sat later in the supply closet, the mop bucket beside them, the wooden box between them like a sacred altar. Alara touched the stethoscope with her small fingers, her brow furrowed in thought. Then she asked the question that broke him open. "Dad, why do good people get forgotten?" The words echoed in the silence. He stared at her, his heart splitting at the innocence of it, at the quiet pain behind her eyes. How could he explain that the world did not always reward goodness, that sometimes truth was punished while lies thrived? How could he tell her that his invisibility was not chosen, but imposed, a sentence delivered by those who feared his voice? He swallowed hard. "Because—" His voice cracked, the confession trembling on his lips. "Because sometimes the world doesn't want to remember them." Alara tilted her head, unsatisfied. "That's not fair." "No," he whispered. "It isn't." And in that moment, the weight of years pressed down on him. The silence he had carried, the humiliation he had endured, the life of shadows he had accepted. All of it cracked under the gaze of an 8-year-old girl who believed he was more than what the world said he was. Every child asks questions, but some questions carry the weight of prophecy. Alara's words were not just the curiosity of a daughter. They were a mirror, forcing Harrison to confront what he had become. The janitor, the ghost, the forgotten man. She refused to see him that way. She saw the healer, the protector, the man buried beneath the dust of injustice. And once a child believes in who you are, the world can never bury it completely. That night, Harrison lay awake long after Alara had fallen asleep beside the wooden box. He stared at the cracked ceiling of their small apartment, his mind replaying her question again and again. Why do good people get forgotten? He knew the answer too well. He had lived it. But he also knew something else. Forgotten was not the same as gone. And somewhere deep inside, in the place where he had locked away his old self, a thought stirred like an ember catching wind. What if? He couldn't stay invisible forever. By morning, he was back to routine, pushing his mop, bowing his head, pretending to be less than he was. But something had shifted. The wound he carried had been named aloud, and naming a wound is the first step to healing it. And though he tried to silence it, the truth whispered inside him, relentless as a heartbeat. He was not just a janitor. He was Harrison Whitmore, doctor, father, man of conscience. And sooner than he wanted, the world would remember. Power looked different at 3 in the morning. Not a roaring boardroom, not a stock line sprinting upward, but a thin green trace on a monitor and the hush between 2 fragile breaths. In that hour, Valerie Hale's empire was the size of room 7A, and every subject was fear. She was 30, the youngest chief executive Hale Genix had ever crowned, the press's velvet blade. Photos made her look engineered, clean angles, measured eyes, certainty for sale. Fluorescent light told another truth. Her blazer hung like dented armor. Her hair, usually a signature, sagged into a quick knot. Her phone blinked with bored messages she ignored. The only notification she could hear was her daughter's heart. Isla lay on the bed, 8 years old, light as a bundle of sticks, brave in the way children are brave, because they do not know any other way. The disease moved quietly, a cascade of renegade enzymes nibbling her from the inside. When it flared, she shook. When it eased, it left absence, as if appetite had fallen through a trap door. Valerie learned the language: catalytic domains, misfolded proteins, runaway proteases. She learned to stand still enough that machines forgot to notice her. She learned that money opens every door, but a door that has not been built. "Mom," Isla whispered, when the pain thinned to a string. "Is the bad river quiet now?" She had named it herself, the current under her skin when chemistry went cruel. Children make terror simple. Adults lacquer fear in Latin. "For now, baby," Valerie said. She held Isla's hand, bird bone light, and counted because counting kept panic from colonizing her lungs. "It's quiet now." In the corridor, a team waited like weather forming. Hematologists, biochemists, a statistician with soft shoes. Not the hospital staff. Parallel medicine. Valerie had built it because official routes were tar. Off-book work moved faster if you were willing to pay with sleep and reputation. Dr. Nair, hair black as ink, spoke softly. "We ran every donor. The collision overwhelms buffers. Matching phenotypes won't be enough. We need an anomaly. Something standard screens miss." Valerie nodded once. Her voice was negotiation, stripped of theater. "Then widen the aperture." "We are widening it," Nair said. "But this anomaly is rare enough to be myth." "Myth is a truth, waiting for witnesses," Valerie murmured, watching her daughter dream beneath paper stars. The blanket's pattern felt like a dare. Keep believing. At 3:30, a nurse adjusted the IV. At 3:40, Isla's heart rate fluttered and settled, like a bird startling in a hedge. At 3:50, legal counsel pinged. The shadow team was a liability. Valerie closed the thread. Liability was a synonym for love. She walked to the vending machines and bought coffee that tasted like rain strained through ash. Dawn would not rescue her. Dawn would only demand reports. She returned to find a plain white envelope on her chair. No courier. No stamp. The paper smelled like corner stores, and rent paid in cash. Threat, she thought. Then, uninvited, hope. She opened it with a fingernail. One printed line. the kind an old office printer leaves with ghosts of letters down the margin. If no one can save your child, find the one who refused the Nobel. She read it twice, then again. Refused the Nobel. The phrase threw a stone into still water, and rings widened through memory. Somewhere, years back, she had devoured a rumor. A brilliant military hematologist who walked away rather than bless a program he called unforgivable. No citations, only whispers. She filed it under tragedy and kept moving. "Ms. Hale," Nair said gently, "Isla's labs are back. The cascade is accelerating. We can buy ours. I don't know how many." Valerie slid the note inside her blazer like a pulse you hide with a palm. "Search outside the registry," she said. "Military records, field hospitals, disaster deployments, any profile with anomalies and a habit of disappearing." "Even if they were sanctioned?" Nair asked, careful with the word. "Especially then." Valerie rested her forehead against the hallway glass and watched her breath ghost the pain. The city was paling at the edges. In 2 hours, directors would want numbers. Risk would be discussed as if it were a commodity and not a child with a bracelet threaded in yellow and gray. She touched the glass where Isla's wrist lay. They had woven that bracelet between fevers. Memory ached with a clean brightness, the kind that hurts because it is true. Witnesses, she had said earlier. Perhaps she was the one who needed to witness, to admit that the armor didn't fit here, that every clever mask left a rib uncovered. Refused, she tasted the word. In her world, people accepted, aligned, acquiesced. Refusal sounded like oxygen. At 5, she asked Leon, the night guard, to scan corridor footage. On his small monitor, a figure in a maintenance uniform slipped into frame, left the envelope, and vanished along blind angles as if he knew them by geometry. Head down, gait economical. Not a courier, a man who could disappear between frames. "Friend of yours?" Leon asked, tone flat, eyes kind. "I don't have friends," Valerie said. "I have obligations." "Sometimes they're the same thing," he said, and returned to his screens. By 6, the building changed color. Day voices thinned the night. Nair returned with a tablet. Shadows grayed under her eyes. "We cross-referenced veterans with off-registry blood work, mapped against anomalies in 2 theaters. 1 profile recurs. Same age band, same skill signature, same pattern of vanishing." Valerie took the tablet. Redactions everywhere. At the bottom, someone had been merciful or tired. A single unredacted datum, a name without title, ordinary until it wasn't. Harrison. Heat moved through Valerie's chest so quickly she mistook it for fear. She lifted her eyes to the glass and whispered to the girl beneath the paper stars, "Hold on." She did not believe in prayers, but the sentence felt like one anyway. Behind her, sunlight found the envelope on the chair, and the inked line brightened as if the page were warm. "Find the one who refused the Nobel." Outside, the first bus hissed to a stop and exhaled a handful of nurses in mint scrubs. Valerie watched them hurry in, heads bowed against a wind that smelled like metal and rain. She tucked the envelope deeper into her pocket. Somewhere in this building, a man who knew how to vanish had left her a map disguised as a sentence. She intended to follow it. The janitor's closet smelled of bleach and rust, of long nights emptied into silence. Harrison Hale, though no one ever called him that anymore, sat hunched on the edge of a wooden stool, his hand stained faintly with detergent, knuckles cracked from labor that did not fit the mind behind them. Outside, the city dawned. Inside, the only light was the bulb swinging lazily above his head. He had just finished another shift that blurred into a year, a decade, a punishment disguised as survival. The knock came quiet, deliberate, not the rap of security, not the hesitant tap of maintenance. He opened the door with a guarded face, only to see the woman every newspaper painted as invincible. Valerie Hale stood there, blazer draped like armor, lips pressed into a line that trembled only when she thought no one was watching. Behind her eyes burned a plea she would rather die than speak aloud. "I know who you are," she said. No preamble, no courtesy. "And I need you." Harrison let the words hang. They did not pierce him. They slid across scars too old to bleed. He stepped aside without invitation, but Valerie entered anyway, filling the small room with perfume and desperation. "You have the wrong man," he muttered. His voice was low, a gravel road worn by storms. She shook her head, defiance stitched into every gesture. "I followed the trail, the envelope, the anomalies, the rumors. The one who refused the Nobel. You were a hematologist. You wrote the first drafts of the molecular enzyme theory, the same one my daughter's life depends on." The fluorescent bulb buzzed above them, a witness to the collision of two ghosts. Harrison's jaw clenched. Memories surfaced uninvited. A tribunal room, sterile and cruel. A project that promised miracles and delivered horror. His refusal to sign, his testimony buried, his career exiled. He had walked away from everything, status, prestige, even his name, because the cost had been children, orphans used as vessels. Their cries never left his marrow. "You've read too much fiction," he said flatly. Valerie leaned closer, her mask cracking. "She's 8 years old. She has days. I don't care about politics, about buried careers. I care about Isla." Her voice wavered for the first time. "She is all I have." Harrison's gaze dropped to the floor. "So were they," he whispered. "The ones they asked me to sacrifice. The orphans no one would miss." I said no. That was my crime. I walked out and they erased me. Do you think I'll walk back into their fire now, just because a CEO's daughter is burning? The silence cut deeper than any argument. Valerie's hand trembled as she reached into her bag and pulled out Isla's lab reports, pages trembling like thin bones. She laid them on the janitor's stool, between his hands, scarred by soap. "You don't have to trust me, but trust your own work. It was yours before they stole it." Harrison looked at the numbers, enzymes misfiring, proteins devouring themselves, a body unraveling under the weight of a single flaw. His breath hitched. Recognition was a blade. He could not unsee the proof. This was his battlefield, his theory, twisted yet still alive. He shut the folder with a snap, forcing the ghosts back. "No," he said, standing abruptly. "I will not let them use me again." The door creaked. In its frame appeared Alara, his daughter, small but fierce, eyes bright as if she had overheard every word. She held the wooden box her mother had left, its brass hinge glinting like memory. She stepped into the room with the confidence of a child who had lived too long in the shadow of secrets. "Dad," she said softly, "you always told me blood carries more than life. It carries truth." Harrison tried to speak, but Alara's voice cut through, steady and clear. "If your blood can save someone, it shouldn't stay in the dark. It doesn't belong there." She looked at Valerie, then back to him. "What if Mom's message wasn't just for me? What if it was for you, too?" Her fingers traced the carved letters on the box, the faint inscription from her mother. "To heal is to resist forgetting." Valerie swallowed hard, watching the exchange. She had come expecting to negotiate with intellect, to appeal to reason. She had not expected a child to be her ally. Harrison closed his eyes, shoulders tightening under a weight he had carried for too long. "Alara," he began, his voice cracking. But she stepped closer, placing the box in his hands. "You told me the world forgets good people because they don't fight to be remembered. Maybe this is how you fight." The words pierced where no tribunal ever had. For years he had believed his silence was integrity, that fading into anonymity was the only protest left to him. But here was his daughter. Proof that silence was also inheritance, passed down like disease. Valerie's tone softened, stripped of its sharp edges. I'm not asking you to stand before the world again. I'm asking you to stand before one child. Mine. The bulb flickered. Harrison felt time compress. The tribunal's cold eyes, the faces of orphans unremembered, his wife's dying words, his daughter's stubborn gaze. The refusal that once defined him now twisted into something else. The possibility that refusal could also be cowardice. His chest tightened. He turned away, unable to meet either woman's eyes. Do you know what they'll do if they find out I'm alive in this way? They'll drag us both back into their machinery. They'll devour you, Alara. Then let me choose, she said firmly. Let me choose not to live in shadows. The words silenced him. His daughter, 8 years old, holding the wisdom of lifetimes, was braver than the man who had raised her. He sank onto the stool, covering his face with both hands. For the first time, Valerie did not press. She waited, still as prayer, letting the silence right itself. At last, Harrison lifted his head. His eyes were wet, but behind them glimmered something fierce, long buried. He looked at Alara, then at Valerie. His voice was rough, scraped raw. One drop, he said. One drop of blood. That is all I will give. No promises. No return to the life they stole from me. Valerie's exhale shuddered with gratitude. Alara's small hand slid into his, warm against his calloused palm. And in the dim janitor's closet, where once he had hidden from the world, Harrison Hale made his first step back into it. The laboratory was buried 3 floors beneath the hospital, sealed by biometric locks and silence. To most of the world, it did not exist. To Valerie Hale, it had become the center of her life, a shrine where hope and terror knelt side by side. Isla lay pale under the cold glow of surgical lamps, her breath shallow, her eyelids fluttering like fragile wings. Every beep of the monitor pressed a countdown into her chest. Harrison sat in a sterile chair at the edge of the room, his arm rolled up, sleeve pinned by tape. He looked more soldier than janitor now, though not in uniform, but in bearing. Still hardened, carrying weight. His blood, once buried in obscurity, was now coiled in the tubing of the transfusion machine, a lifeline waiting to leap across the chasm between life and death. The technician adjusted the last dial, glanced nervously at Valerie, then whispered, "The compatibility is nearly perfect." Nearly. That word lived in the cracks of every medical miracle, but to Valerie it was salvation. Her hand clenched the rail of her daughter's bed. She turned to Harrison, voice low but sharp with gratitude and dread. "If this works, no one outside this room will ever know. Your name stays buried, I promise you." Harrison nodded once, a soldier's nod, no flourish. "Do it." The nurse inserted the line, and the first drops of crimson slipped into the tube, traveling like a caravan toward the frail body of Isla Hale. Valerie's daughter twitched, her lips parting with a soundless sigh. It was as if life itself had paused, leaning forward to see what would happen. Alara pressed against the glass of the observation panel, too small to be allowed inside, but too stubborn to leave. Her hands, smudged against the glass, carried her mother's box clutched tightly to her chest. The stethoscope inside rattled, as if impatient. She whispered to herself, counting the drops, tracing every rhythm as though her 8 years of reading medical journals could steady the flow of fate. Minutes passed, like lifetimes. The monitors steadied. The numbers climbed in fragile increments. The team exhaled together. For the first time in months, Valerie's hand brushed her daughter's without fear of cold stillness. A sob caught in her throat. She squeezed Isla's fingers. Then the alarm screamed. The enzyme processor, a machine designed to stabilize the transfusion by filtering and adapting blood proteins, flared red across its panels. Numbers spiked, then plummeted. Isla's heart rate jolted, wild and uneven. The technician cursed under his breath. "Enzyme cascade! Unstable reaction!" Valerie's world cracked. She lurched toward the machine. "Fix it!" she barked, but fear drowned her authority. Harrison surged forward, his soldier's calm collapsing into a doctor's fury. "Shut it down manually. Override the sequence, or she'll go into shock." The technician's hands shook. "The processor's jammed. Commands not responding." The alarm grew shrill, a countdown to death. Isla convulsed on the bed, her chest heaving. Valerie screamed her name, gripping her daughter's hand, as if sheer will might hold her in the world. Through the glass, Ilara's eyes widened. She saw what they didn't: the tube's rhythm, the protein sequence misfiring, the processor choking on its own logic. She had read about this in one of her contraband journals, the risk of enzyme inversion when a machine overcompensated, but none of them were looking at the right variable. She slammed her small fists on the glass. "It's not the blood, it's the calibration. You're targeting the wrong cascade." No one heard her. No one except Harrison, who turned at the sound of her voice. Their eyes locked, father to daughter, across the glass. She mouthed a single phrase: "Check the stabilizer." He froze, the world narrowing. For a moment, it was as if he saw his wife in her, the same fierce certainty. He turned back to the panel, fingers moving without hesitation. He ripped open the manual override slot, sparks jumping as he yanked free the stabilizer relay. "She's right," he growled. "Bypass it," the technician gasped. "That'll do it," Harrison roared. Together, they rerouted the flow. The machine stuttered, groaned, then steadied with a new hum. The alarms cut off, leaving a silence more deafening than sound. Isla's vitals flickered on the screen, spiking, then leveling into a fragile but steady rhythm. Valerie collapsed against the bed, her forehead pressed to her daughter's arm, sobbing without restraint. The team staggered back, their chests heaving. No one spoke for fear the spell might break. Behind the glass, Ilara exhaled, her breath fogging the panel. She closed her eyes, clutching the box to her chest like a talisman. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but her smile was fierce. She had been part of the saving. Harrison stood frozen, his hand still gripping the burnt relay. He looked at his daughter through the glass, pride and terror colliding in his chest. He had hidden her brilliance, tried to keep her from the shadows that had devoured him. Yet it was her courage, her clarity, that had saved Isla when machines and adults had failed. Valerie lifted her head slowly, eyes swollen, mascara blurred. She looked at Harrison, not as janitor, not as relic, but as the man whose blood and daughter's genius had pulled her child back from the abyss. "You," she whispered. "You just gave her back to me." Harrison shook his head, voice hoarse. "No." "She did." He nodded toward the glass, where Ilara stood small but unshaken. Valerie's gaze followed. For the first time in her life, the CEO saw a child, not as fragile or dependent, but as force incarnate. Carrying hope in her small hands, she pressed a trembling palm to the glass opposite Ilara's. Slowly, Ilara lifted hers in return, their palms separated only by the pain, yet connected by something larger. Faith. The transfusion stabilized. Isla's breaths deepened, no longer stolen, but returned. For the first time, she looked almost like a sleeping child, not a battlefield. The room exhaled, but Harrison did not. He knew what this meant. The secret was out. His blood, his knowledge, his daughter's gift, all of it was no longer invisible. And once the world smelled miracles, It never stopped hunting. But in that fragile moment, with the sound of steady monitors singing their fragile hymn, he allowed himself one thing he had not felt in years: hope. The lab was chaos. Red light strobed across the sterile walls, and the shriek of alarms pressed into everyone's skulls. Isla's body trembled violently against the restraints, her frail chest arching as if pulled by invisible strings. Valerie clutched her daughter's hand, whispering broken pleas through clenched teeth. Harrison leaned over the machine, sweat on his brow, trying to override the frozen sequence. But the processor kept spitting out the same verdict: fatal enzyme cascade. The technicians barked numbers back and forth, but their voices were lost in the storm of panic. A nurse shouted about cardiac arrest preparations. Another scrambled for a crash cart. And then, through the noise, came a voice not meant to belong in this battlefield. "Stop!" Ilara's voice cut across the alarms, high-pitched, sharp, but steady, with a force that didn't match her age. Everyone turned. Through the glass panel, the small girl banged her fists again and screamed, "Lower the machine index! Set it to 6.4. The pH is wrong." For a moment, no one moved. The words were absurd, coming from a child, from a girl barely tall enough to reach the panel herself. But Harrison froze, his heart leaping. He knew that tone. It was the same stubborn clarity that had once poured from his late wife in emergency rooms, the voice that never doubted itself when life and death hung on decimals. Valerie blinked in shock, gripping the rail tighter. What did she say? Ilara didn't wait. She darted to the door, slammed her palm on the emergency release, and slipped inside before anyone could stop her. A guard reached out, but Harrison raised his arm, commanding silently, "Let her through." The alarms howled. Isla's monitor dipped dangerously, but Ilara marched right up to the console. Her small hands shook as she reached for the dials, but her eyes were fierce, unwavering. "The buffer is collapsing," she said, her voice cracking but sure. "The proteins are folding wrong. If you don't adjust the acidity, she won't last another 30 seconds. The head technician sputtered. "This is nonsense. She's a child." But Harrison snapped, voice like thunder. "Do it. Follow her lead." The room held its breath. Ilara stretched on her toes, reaching the dial, but it was locked under an override code. She looked at her father. Without hesitation, Harrison slammed in the manual key, releasing the lock. Together, father and daughter moved as one. He steadying the panel, she twisting the dial down until the gauge read 6.4. The effect was not instant. For one terrible moment, Isla's heart flatlined into a single tone, the shrill wail of finality. Valerie's scream tore through the room, but then the monitor spiked. Once, twice. Rhythm returned, fragile but real. Isla gasped, her tiny lungs pulling in air as if for the first time. The room erupted in cries and gasps. Relief crashed like a tidal wave. Ilara staggered back, trembling, clutching the wooden box against her chest. Her face was pale, but her eyes glowed with something raw. Belief. The young nurse, Samira, had been frozen at the foot of the bed, her hands pressed to her lips. Tears streamed down her cheeks now, not from fear, but recognition. In her mind, she was back in a forgotten ward, months earlier, when she had seen the janitor patching up a homeless man with a deep laceration. No gloves, no charts, just Harrison sewing flesh with precision and tenderness no textbook could teach. She had carried that memory in silence, never daring to speak it. And now, here was his daughter, saving a child when seasoned doctors faltered. Samira broke. She stepped forward, covering her mouth with both hands, sobbing. "I knew it," she whispered hoarsely. "I knew he wasn't just a janitor. And she, oh God, she's his mirror." Valerie raised her tear-soaked face, staring at Alara as if seeing an apparition. How could you know this? Her voice cracked between awe and disbelief. Alara looked at Isla, then back at Valerie. Because I've been reading since I could. Because my mom wanted me to understand the body, not fear it. Because sometimes, you don't need permission to save someone. The room was silent except for the steady pulse of Isla's monitor, each beep echoing like a bell of resurrection. Harrison placed a hand gently on Alara's shoulder, grounding her, steadying himself through her courage. He whispered, not just for her, but for everyone listening. You all heard her. Remember this. Sometimes the smallest voice is the one that carries the truth. Valerie's lips trembled. She reached across the space, brushing Alara's cheek with her fingers. For the first time, the powerful CEO's armor cracked, not as a titan of industry, but as a mother bowing before the miracle of another child. Thank you, she whispered. You saved her. You saved my little girl. Alara clutched the wooden box tighter, her mother's stethoscope rattling inside. No, she said softly, her eyes flicking to Isla's sleeping form. She saved herself. I just reminded the machine how to listen. Samira wept openly now, her tears staining her scrubs, whispering prayers of gratitude she hadn't uttered in years. Others turned away, ashamed that it took a child to speak what their training had blinded them to. The lab settled into a fragile calm, but everyone knew it had shifted. The miracle was no longer only in Harrison's blood. It was in the voice of his daughter, cutting through fear, demanding to be heard. And in that silence, Valerie realized she wasn't just indebted to Harrison. She was tied now, bound to his family by something deeper than secrecy. By the undeniable truth that sometimes salvation arrives in the form of an 8-year-old girl. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the silence of the recovery ward. Isla lay pale but breathing, her chest rising with the rhythm of restored life. Machines hummed softly, no longer screaming death, but whispering stability. Valerie sat beside her daughter, one hand wrapped around the tiny fingers she'd nearly lost, her other hand trembling against her own lips, as though afraid any sound might break the fragile miracle. Across the room, Harrison stood with his back against the wall, arms folded, gaze lowered. Alara had curled herself in a chair, her small legs tucked beneath her, clutching the wooden box as if it were her heartbeat. Her eyes, though heavy with exhaustion, never left Isla. She seemed unwilling to relax until the other girl fully awakened. Valerie's voice finally broke the silence, hesitant, testing, as if afraid the truth might unravel if spoken too loudly. She's your daughter, and what she did in there, was that. She swallowed, eyes darting toward Alara. Is she a medical prodigy? Some kind of savant? The question hung heavy, its awe mixed with a shade of fear. To Valerie, who had built empires on measurable skill and quantifiable power, Alara's act seemed to border on the supernatural. Harrison lifted his gaze at last. His green eyes met Valerie's, calm yet cutting, as if the years of silence had forged them into steel. His reply was low, firm, and unyielding. No, she's not a genius. She only had a father who believed in her. The words dropped like stones into a well. Valerie blinked, stunned. She expected equations, genetic explanations, a speech about legacy. Instead, she got faith. Pure, unadorned faith. Harrison's eyes softened as he glanced at Alara, whose head had finally begun to droop with fatigue. Her mother left her a box of tools, yes. She left her words, yes. But tools don't make miracles. Children aren't born with blueprints for courage. They grow into it only if someone holds the ground beneath their feet. I held it. That's all. Valerie let the words seep into her, but they tasted bitter. For years, she had believed that love, if it existed at all, was conditional, transactional, something that required proof of worth. She had worked herself into a fortress of glass and steel, trading comfort for conquest, companionship for command. And now, here was a man in faded uniform and janitor's apron, telling her that belief alone could bend the arc of fate. Her gaze returned to Isla's frail body. She thought of the endless nights of contracts, the laboratories funded, the armies of experts bought, all the resources she had burned in search of control. And in the end, her daughter was saved by a little girl with trust in her father's faith. Not money, not machines, not her towering empire. For the first time in years, doubt bloomed in Valerie Hale's chest, a doubt not about the world, but about herself. She turned sharply back to Harrison, as if trying to catch him in contradiction. But she knew about the pH, about enzyme collapse. That isn't just belief. That's knowledge no child should have. Harrison allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Belief makes a child hungry enough to learn. While other kids were memorizing cartoons, Ilara was tracing diagrams, listening to me when I whispered lessons I wasn't supposed to teach. She studied because she believed her mother's voice still echoed in those books. She spoke tonight because she believed I wouldn't let her fall if she was wrong. That's what you saw. Not a genius. Just belief made flesh. Valerie's throat tightened. She leaned back, her eyes glossing as her grip on Isla's hand weakened. She whispered almost to herself. And I've built everything on power. On proof. On the certainty that people only follow strength. Her chest heaved. What if I've been wrong all along? What if I've been leading my daughter down the same path, where faith dies and only control matters? No one answered her. The hum of machines filled the space instead, punctuated by Isla's shallow breaths. Ilara stirred then, her small voice cracking through the silence. She's safe now. Valerie turned, startled. She hadn't realized the girl was awake. Ilara rubbed her eyes, then gazed at Isla with something fiercer than innocence. She'll need time, but she'll wake. I promise. Valerie's lip quivered. How can you promise that? Ilara tilted her head, considering. Then she glanced at her father, and her answer was simple. Because my dad believes me. The sentence, childlike and unpolished, landed with the weight of scripture. Valerie's breath hitched, and tears spilled unchecked down her cheeks. She had never once heard such confidence in her own home, never once felt the quiet certainty of someone believing in her without condition. Harrison moved toward his daughter, kneeling so he was level with her. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, whispering, "You've done enough for tonight. Rest now." Ilara nodded, finally surrendering to sleep, her head falling against his chest. Valerie watched them, something cracking deep within her, the realization that all her armies, all her accolades, could not replicate the bond unfolding before her. She felt small, smaller than she had ever felt in the boardrooms where she towered. Belief, she murmured again, almost a confession. And I've been starving my own child of it. Harrison glanced at her, his voice firm but not cruel. It's not too late. But it starts with you. The words struck with the finality of a gavel. Valerie turned back to Isla, who lay breathing softly, her skin warmed with faint color. For the first time in years, Valerie reached not with command, but with trembling humility. She whispered to her daughter, words that tasted foreign but true. I believe in you, my love. I believe in you. The night deepened, wrapping them in fragile peace. Yet beneath it, a shift had already begun, not just in Isla's fragile body, but in Valerie's soul. The woman who had defined herself by control now faced the mirror of her own emptiness. And in the reflection, she saw the outline of a different path. One where faith, not power, was the true inheritance a parent could give. She sat in silence, the thought clawing through her defenses, leaving behind a single question she had never dared to ask. Have I spent my life building the wrong kingdom? The antiseptic light of the hospital had barely faded when Valerie Hale found herself summoned to another battlefield, one without stretchers or monitors, but with glass walls, polished wood, and the cold weight of capital. The boardroom of Hale Genix gleamed as always. A panoramic view of the city stretched across its floor-to-ceiling windows, skyscrapers like steel teeth under a bruised sky. At the head of the table sat Chairman Aldous Crane, silver-haired, his gaze sharper than any scalpel. Around him, 12 other shareholders whispered like crows over carry-on. Valerie entered with the stiffness of someone who had not yet slept. Her daughter was stable, yes, but the image of Isla's fragile breaths still clung to her. Yet she straightened her shoulders, the old armor sliding back into place. Crane's voice cut through the murmurs. "We know, Valerie, about the blood." The words landed like stones. She froze, her pulse stuttering. Another voice, Marion DuPont, finance titan, leaned forward, her nails tapping on the polished table. The donor. The man with the rare enzyme structure. We've seen the lab reports. We know he's not just a match for Isla. He's a genetic goldmine. The room darkened with intent. A projection flickered onto the wall. Strands of DNA, glowing, annotated with predictions of enhanced resilience, recovery speed, even neural elasticity. Military applications whispered between the lines. Valerie's jaw tightened. That data was supposed to be locked, confidential. Crane's thin smile revealed no warmth. In Hale Genix, nothing is truly locked. You know that better than anyone. You've buried your share of inconvenient truths for this company. The accusation struck home. Valerie remembered too well. 5 years ago, she had orchestrated the silencing of a whistleblower who exposed a failed pediatric trial. She hadn't ordered harm, but she had pulled levers to ensure the story vanished. Papers rewritten, families pacified with blood money. She had told herself it was for the greater good, for the research, for the investors, for progress. Now the hypocrisy rose like bile in her throat. Marion spoke again, crisp and merciless. "We're prepared to move forward, clone the blood, patent the enzyme, sell exclusive rights to the Defense Department. Hale Genix would never have to worry about competition again. Imagine an army that doesn't falter, soldiers who heal faster than they can be injured. We would be untouchable." The board hummed in agreement, numbers already dancing in their eyes. Billions, perhaps trillions. Valerie's hands clenched against the table's edge. "You're talking about turning a man's life into a weapon, about stealing the very thing that saved my daughter and selling it to feed wars." Crane's eyes glittered. "We're talking about securing the company's future, and yours, if you choose wisely. Reject this plan, Valerie, and you'll lose not only your seat, but your empire. You'll watch someone else pilot Hale Genix into the age of genetic supremacy." The silence stretched. Valerie felt the weight of her entire career pressing down, the echo of every ruthless choice that had brought her here. Once, she might have embraced this without hesitation. Once, she might have spun it into a triumph of science, of power. But Isla's sleeping face rose in her mind, and behind it, Alara's fierce little voice. "Because my dad believes me." The contrast cut her open. For years, she had believed in nothing but leverage. And now? She stood on the knife's edge of a choice that could damn her forever. Her throat burned as she forced herself to speak. "Do you even know who that man is?" The board stilled, eyes narrowing. She continued, her voice low but steady. He was once the brightest hematologist in the world, the man who discovered the very molecular pathways you're salivating over. And do you know why he disappeared? Because he refused to test on children. He turned down a Nobel nomination rather than stain it with blood. Shock rippled faintly around the table, though Crane's smirk did not falter. He's the conscience this industry buried, Valerie pressed. And now you want to exhume him like raw material. Do you think the world won't see through it? Do you think history won't spit on halogenics the same way it spit on every empire that tried to weaponize innocence? Crane leaned forward, his voice silken but poisonous. And what will you do, Valerie? You've danced this dance before. You buried scandals. You protected the machine. You are one of us. Don't pretend otherwise now. The words hit like shackles. The memory of that silenced scandal clawed at her, reminding her of the woman she had been. Efficient, merciless, untouchable. Her pulse pounded. Her fingernails dug crescents into her palms. For a moment, she almost surrendered, almost let herself slip back into the familiar script. Sign the document. Smile for the press. Lock away the guilt. Then she remembered Isla's breath against her hand, fragile yet steady. She remembered Ilara's eyes, fierce with the kind of belief money could never buy, and she realized that if she chose wrong again, her daughter would inherit nothing but ashes. Valerie rose from her seat, the scrape of the chair echoing like a gunshot. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. You're right. I did bury the past. I thought power could protect what mattered. But I was wrong. I won't be that woman again. Not now. Not when the cost is turning salvation into slaughter. The board erupted in protests, voices colliding, accusations hurling through the air. Crane slammed a fist against the table. If you walk away from this, Valerie, you're finished. The company will devour you alive. Valerie's eyes flashed. For the first time, she didn't flinch. Then let it! The room roared, but Valerie no longer heard it. She turned on her heel, her pulse wild, her lungs burning. Each step toward the door felt like tearing links of a chain that had bound her for years. Behind her, Crane's voice thundered like prophecy. You'll regret this. You'll regret throwing away the empire you built. She didn't look back, because in her chest, beneath the fear, something new had begun to bloom. Small, trembling, but undeniable. Not power, not profit. Something far rarer. Faith. And for the first time in her life, Valerie Hale wondered if perhaps that was enough. The hospital ward was quiet, its rhythm reduced to the faint beeping of monitors and the occasional sigh of machines exhaling oxygen into fragile lungs. Valerie Hale sat beside Isla's bed, her body angled protectively toward the small frame beneath the sheets. The fluorescent glow softened around the child's pale cheeks, but the weight of what Valerie had just heard in the boardroom still thundered in her chest. She thought Isla was asleep, yet suddenly, the child's voice, frail but unwavering, slipped into the silence. Mom, Isla whispered, her eyes barely open. I don't want to live if someone else has to be hurt because of me. The words pierced Valerie deeper than any argument in the boardroom ever could. For a moment, she froze, her hands tightening on the blanket, as if she could shield her daughter from her own honesty. Sweetheart, Valerie murmured, fighting the tremor in her voice. Don't say that. You're going to live. You deserve to live. But Isla shook her head slowly. Her eyes, wide, unclouded by greed or ambition, met her mother's. Not if it means stealing. Not if it means soldiers or children get hurt. I don't want that kind of life. Valerie's throat closed. This was her daughter, 8 years old, already carrying clarity that billions of dollars and decades of boardroom battles had stolen from her own heart. Isla's words were not just a plea. They were a mirror, showing Valerie the truth she had been too frightened to admit. Her hand brushed Isla's hair, trembling. "No one should ever suffer for you, my love. You're right. You are right." And for the first time in years, Valerie felt the sharp sting of shame dissolve into something purer, the fragile, dangerous birth of conviction. Later that evening, when the nurses dimmed the lights and the world seemed to shrink into the hush of a single ward, Ilara slipped inside. Harris had stepped away, leaving his daughter with a promise to return soon. Ilara carried something pressed close to her chest, a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by years of careful handling. Isla stirred when she saw the girl, her face lit with the tentative warmth of recognition. They had spoken only briefly before, Ilara's fierce instructions that had saved her during the procedure. But in Isla's eyes, Ilara already glowed like something more than human. "Hi," Isla whispered. "You're the girl who fixed the machine." Ilara smiled, a little shy, but her gaze was steady. "I just noticed something the others missed. Anyone could have done it." Isla shook her head, her lips curving faintly. "Not anyone. You." Ilara approached the bed and sat at the edge, careful not to disturb the tubes and wires. She placed the wooden box in Isla's lap. "What's this?" Isla asked, fingertips grazing the lid. "It belonged to my mom," Ilara said softly. Her voice carried none of the bravado she had shown in the operating room. Instead, it was woven with reverence, like a secret handed down. "She gave it to my dad before she passed, and he gave it to me. I think maybe now it belongs with you." Isla blinked, surprised. "But why me?" Ilara's eyes darkened with memory. "Because you remind me of her. She believed life wasn't about power, or even just surviving. It was about choosing the right thing, even when it hurts. She wrote something before she died, and I've kept it all this time." Her fingers traced the latch of the box, and she gently opened it. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, its creases soft from being unfolded and read too many times. She slid it toward Isla with careful hands. "Read it," Ilara urged. Isla unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. The words were simple, handwritten in ink that had faded but not lost its strength. "If you save someone by doing what is right, you have already lived forever." The silence that followed was heavy, yet not oppressive. It was filled with something unspoken, a current that passed between the two children. Isla's eyes glistened, the words sinking into her fragile heart like a seed into fertile soil. "I don't know if I can ever be that brave," Isla whispered. "You already are," Ilara replied firmly. "You spoke the truth to your mom, even when it hurt. That's the beginning of everything." Tears welled in Isla's eyes, spilling down her cheeks. She clutched the paper to her chest, as if it were a talisman. Then, almost instinctively, she reached out and gripped Ilara's hand. The two girls sat together, one pale and weakened, the other small but fierce, bound not by blood, but by something stronger. A shared understanding that life could only matter if it carried truth. From the doorway, Valerie had been watching quietly. She had come to check on Isla, but the sight of her daughter and Ilara together rooted her in place. The image seared itself into her heart. Two children, carrying more wisdom and courage than the entire board of Hale Janix. Valerie's chest ached. These girls were the reminder she had needed, the proof that innocence and clarity still existed in a world twisted by ambition. She realized, with a force that nearly knocked her breathless, that perhaps her empire had never been her true legacy. Perhaps it was Isla. Perhaps it was moments like this. Moments where the truth could bloom, even in the smallest voices. Her eyes softened as she stepped forward, brushing Isla's hair with trembling fingers. She looked at Alara and whispered, "Thank you for giving her this." Alara shook her head gently. "It wasn't mine to keep. It was always meant to be passed on." The wooden box rested now on Isla's lap, but in truth, it had already moved deeper. It had taken root not just in one child's heart, but in two, binding them in ways neither empire nor science could measure. Valerie felt something shift inside her, a quiet, undeniable surrender. She no longer needed the boardroom's approval, nor the illusion of control she had clung to for so long. What she needed was here, in the fragile honesty of her daughter, and in the fierce loyalty of a janitor's child who believed that saving lives meant living forever. And as the night deepened, Valerie sat beside them, silent, humbled, and for the first time in her life, at peace with the possibility of losing everything, because she had finally found what was worth keeping. The boardroom of Halegenics gleamed like a cathedral of glass and steel, polished to reflect wealth, power, and certainty. But beneath the sheen, a storm brewed. Valerie Hale sat at the head of the mahogany table, her posture rigid, her face carved with defiance. Around her, the other board members shuffled papers, their voices sharp, their tempers fraying. On the table lay a single sheet of paper, a contract, its title, bold and sterile, cut through the tension. Proprietary valuation of subject H47. H47. Not a name, not even a human, just a code. Harris. Valerie's hand hovered over the pen, her jaw tight. Every instinct honed through years of corporate battles screamed that she should sign, secure her position, keep her empire intact. But another voice, softer, relentless, whispered of her daughter's fragile breath, of Alara's unyielding courage, of Harris's quiet sacrifice. "Sign it, Valerie," snapped Rothman, the oldest of the shareholders. His voice cracked like a whip. "Do not mistake sentiment for duty. This is about survival, of this company, of innovation itself." Beside him, Marquez leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "We're not monsters. The valuation simply ensures control. Imagine the applications. Armies immune to disease, a medical revolution. Billions of lives saved, billions more in revenue. The board demands leadership, not hesitation." Valerie's eyes narrowed. "You mean billions made?" A hush fell. Marquez smirked, unfazed. "You say that like it's a crime." Then came the outburst. A younger shareholder, Klein, slammed his hand on the table, veins bulging in his neck. "It's a number, Valerie. That's all. A sample, a cell, a sequence. It's not a man. It's not even his blood. It's property once it's extracted. This is math, not morality." The words sliced the air, final, like a gavel strike. But Valerie stood. The chair scraped back, her heels echoing on the marble floor, as she walked toward the panoramic window overlooking the city. She stared at the skyline for a moment, her reflection fractured against the glass, then turned to face them. "No," she said quietly, her voice steady as stone. "It's not math, it's not property, and it is not for sale." The silence that followed was suffocating. Every shareholder stared at her, eyes wide, jaws slack. They had seen Valerie bend, compromise, crush rivals without flinching. But this was rebellion. "You're destroying everything you've built," Rothman hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "No," Valerie replied, her chest heaving with conviction. "I'm saving what little humanity we have left." She pointed to the document, her finger quivering not with fear, but with fury. "You see numbers on a page. I see the man who saved my child. I see the child of that man, who risked everything to tell the truth in a room full of doctors twice her age. And I see my daughter, alive today, only because someone refused to be treated like a number. Klein sneered. This is dangerous idealism. You'd sacrifice the company for what? Valerie cut him off. For a human life. Yes, and I would do it again. The words rang like a bell in the hollow room. Her voice lowered, but it carried like a blade. Do you know why Isla almost died? Because years ago, people in this very room believed as you do now. That children were numbers, that cells were property, that mistakes could be hidden behind clinical codes and non-disclosure agreements. Gasps rippled through the room. Rothman shifted uncomfortably. Marquez's jaw tightened. They knew. Valerie leaned forward, her voice breaking with restrained emotion. Isla is not just my daughter. She was one of those children, one of the test subjects in Project Seraphim. A project Her breath hitched, her chest caving with the weight of confession. I signed off on, without reading every detail, without stopping to ask if the cost was too high. I buried it in paperwork. I told myself it was progress. Her fists clenched, nails digging into her palms. And now I live with the truth. My daughter was the cost. And you dare stand here and tell me Harris's blood is just a number? That's why Isla is dying. That's why children like her are dying. Because of men like you who reduce lives to columns and percentages. Her words shattered the boardroom's composure. For a moment, no one moved. Even the glass walls seemed to vibrate with the force of her declaration. Finally, Rothman spoke, his voice almost a whisper. If you don't sign, you'll be removed. This company, your empire, will turn on you. You'll lose everything. Valerie's lips curved, not in amusement, but in bitter resolve. Then let it. She reached for the contract, lifted it, and tore it clean in half. The sound of paper ripping filled the air, louder than any shout. She dropped the shreds onto the polished table like ash, her eyes locked on theirs. I will not let another child pay the price my daughter already has. Not with Harris, not with Alara, not with anyone. The board erupted, voices clashing, chairs scraping, fists pounding. The air thickened with fury, accusation, and fear. Yet Valerie stood motionless, her breathing heavy but steady, her spine unyielding. For the first time, she was no longer Hale Jennix's polished shield. She was something else, something freer. Behind the noise, her mind returned to Isla's whisper. I don't want to live if someone else has to be hurt because of me. Valerie knew then that her daughter was not just surviving. She was teaching her mother how to live. And as chaos consumed the room, Valerie understood. She had chosen her side. The auditorium pulsed with light and expectation. Crystal chandeliers bathed the hall in gold, reflecting against velvet drapes and marble columns. Rows of polished seats filled with executives, doctors, journalists, and politicians, all gathered under the banner of Hale Jennix Honors, a night for unsung heroes. For weeks, Valerie had fought the board, weathered scandals, and faced the echo of her past sins. Tonight was meant to be a balm, a carefully orchestrated celebration to shift the narrative. But beneath her composed exterior, her heart beat with defiance. She had insisted on this one change: recognition not for the powerful, not for the shareholders, but for those who had actually saved lives. At the front of the room, a long stage stretched beneath a massive screen projecting the company's emblem. The host, a polished master of ceremonies in a tuxedo, stepped forward, his voice smooth as glass. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, tonight we gather to honor bravery, innovation, and sacrifice. Some heroes wear suits and lead companies. Some wear coats and heel. And some, he paused, glancing at his note cards before smiling. Some wear aprons and carry mops, yet still change the world. A ripple of murmurs stirred across the hall. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. The MC lifted his hand. Please welcome to the stage Ilara Cole and her father, Dr. Harrison Cole. The words seemed to hang in the air, vibrating, stretching time. Dr. Harrison Cole. The camera cut to the back row, where a man in a faded jacket and a girl with shining eyes sat stiffly. Harris's face, rugged and weathered, froze. Ilara's small hand squeezed his, her grip both fearless and pleading. The crowd erupted in applause, some confused, some enthusiastic, some scandalized. Whispers shot like sparks. Doctor? Cole? The janitor? Ilara tugged at her father's arm. Come on, Dad. It's us. Reluctantly, he rose. His figure, tall but humble, carried a presence that silenced the chatter as he guided Ilara toward the stage. With every step, the truth uncoiled. This was no faceless custodian. This was the man who had once authored theories that could reshape medicine. This was the man the system had buried. They climbed the steps. The MC extended a hand, but Ilara ignored him, marching straight to the microphone with the confidence of someone who had already saved a life. Harris stood a pace behind, uncomfortable under the harsh lights. The MC cleared his throat. Ilara, your quick thinking saved young Isla Whitmore when all seemed lost. You reminded us that genius can shine even in the smallest voices. And to your father, Dr. Cole, your blood, your sacrifice, your forgotten brilliance. Tonight, the world remembers. Polite applause followed. But before the MC could continue, movement stirred at the side of the stage. Slowly, almost painfully, an old man in a porter's uniform pushed himself to his feet from the reserved section. His body trembled with age, his cane tapping the floor with each step. His name badge, tarnished but legible, read, Garvey. Security. The hall grew still. Garvey stopped midway down the aisle, leaning heavily on his cane. His back bent, his hair thin, but his eyes glistened with recognition. He lifted his free hand, not a wave, but a salute, a soldier's salute. Dr. Cole, Garvey's voice rang, cracked but steady. Permission to address you, sir. The hall fell silent, every whisper cut short. Harris's lips parted, his eyes softened with disbelief. Slowly, he stepped forward, as if drawn by memory. Garvey's cane struck the floor once, firmly. I served in the 82nd, Afghanistan, '09. I remember a medic who patched up men under fire when others ran. A man who stitched wounds with his bare hands and carried the broken on his back. That medic's name was Dr. Harrison Cole. Gasps rippled like a wave through the audience. Garvey straightened as much as his frail body allowed, his salute unwavering. Sir, it's been an honor to live long enough to say this. Welcome home. A hush spread over the room, deeper than silence. It was the silence of walls cracking, of illusions falling. Executives stared, pale. Reporters scribbled frantically. Valerie, standing at the wings, covered her mouth, tears breaking through the steel of her composure. Ilara tugged her father's sleeve. Dad, she whispered, they see you now. Harris's throat tightened. For years, he had carried his exile like armor, his shame like a chain. Now, in the tremor of an old man's voice and the unwavering salute of a gatekeeper no one had noticed, his name was restored. Not by power, not by wealth, but by memory, loyalty, truth. He stepped forward, laying a hand on Garvey's trembling shoulder. At ease, Sergeant, he said softly, his voice breaking. The crowd, stunned into reverence, rose to its feet. Applause thundered, not polite but raw, carrying gratitude, awe, and apology. People wept openly. The sound filled every corner of the hall, as though the world itself was making amends. Ilara smiled through her tears, her small hand slipping into her father's. "I told you, Dad. Light doesn't stay hidden forever." And in that moment, Harrison Cole, once erased, once nameless, once relegated to the shadows, stood in the open light, no longer invisible. The celebration lingered in the air, applause still echoing faintly as the hall emptied into corridors of chatter. Reporters swarmed the exits, their headlines already half-written. Yet Valerie could not breathe in the triumph. The roar of the evening dulled into a low hum inside her skull, a single phrase repeating like a drumbeat. Dr. Harrison Cole. Back in her office, the night pressed against the window glass like a witness. She stood alone beneath the fluorescent lights, folders spread across her desk. She had demanded the genetic files, a trace audit of the medical program Isla had been enrolled in. Her assistant had hesitated. Such archives were classified, buried beneath layers of red tape. But Valerie had insisted. Tonight had cracked something inside her. She needed the truth, no matter how much it burned. Her fingers shook as she scrolled through decades of encrypted records. Finally, one file opened. A line of digits, sterile and unremarkable, yet immediately suffocating. Genetic scan ID, HLX, 74291. Date, 8 years ago. Valerie froze. Her breath stalled. The sequence matched Isla Whitmore's unique code. Her knees nearly gave way. She sank into her chair, heart hammering, palms pressed to her temples. Isla, the child whose laughter had filled the sterile hospital wing, the girl who clutched dolls, even as tubes trailed from her veins, was not merely a patient. She was a remnant, a survivor of that program. 8 years earlier, Valerie had been the ambitious executive on the rise, the one who signed clearance documents with brisk efficiency. She had been tasked with handling containment for Hailgenix's classified genetic trials, dismissing lawsuits, sanitizing press leaks, reducing children to numbers and statistical margins. She had filed those reports under necessary advancement. She had never asked where the children went. Now she knew. One of them had lived. One of them was Isla. Her vision blurred, memories rushed. Boardroom debates where she defended acceptable loss, hushed conversations about expunged birth records, nights when she had convinced herself silence was survival. She had told herself she was protecting the company. In truth, she had been protecting herself. Valerie pushed back from the desk, pacing the room. Her reflection in the glass startled her. The controlled CEO mask shattered, replaced by a woman trembling, undone. The truth clawed at her chest. A knock startled her. The door opened softly, and Ilara slipped inside, clutching the wooden box she carried everywhere. Her eyes searched Valerie's face. "You found it, didn't you?" the girl asked quietly. Valerie's throat tightened. "Found what?" "The truth," Ilara whispered. She placed the box on the desk, opening it to reveal the folded paper her mother had left her. "If you save someone by doing what is right, you have already lived forever." Valerie reached out, but her hand shook too violently to touch it. She stared at Ilara. This child, unflinching, whose voice had steadied machines when grown men faltered, whose faith in her father had resurrected him before the world's eyes. "Ilara," Valerie rasped, her eyes wet. "I signed the papers. 8 years ago, I approved the project that nearly killed Isla. I didn't know her name then. I didn't want to know. I closed my eyes." Ilara said nothing, only watched with a gaze far older than her years. "And now," Valerie choked, collapsing into a chair. "I look at her, fighting for breath, clutching her mother's hand, and I see the cost of every signature I thought was harmless. I thought I could bury it under progress, under profit." Her voice broke completely. "But the child I'm trying to save is one I already damned." Tears coursed unchecked down her cheeks. For years she had out-argued opponents, silenced whistleblowers, twisted truth into utility. Yet here she was, undone not by a rival but by a child's genetic code. Alara stepped closer. "You can't change what happened," she said gently, her small hands clasped before her. "But you can choose what happens now." Valerie's sobs shook her shoulders. She covered her face, ashamed, unraveling. And then, light as dawn, Alara's hand touched hers. The warmth startled her, so steady for one so young. "Why?" Valerie whispered. "Why would you even look at me after what I've done?" Alara tilted her head, her voice almost a whisper. "Because Ela still smiles at you. Because my dad still gives blood to save people who turned their backs on him. And because if you open your eyes now, you won't be the same person who closed them." The words pierced deeper than any accusation. Valerie lowered her hands. Her eyes were red, her face bare of power's armor. She looked at Alara, really looked, and she saw not judgment, but invitation. Moments later, a soft voice echoed from the doorway. Isla, pale but standing, leaned against her mother, Valerie's assistant supporting her elbow. Her oxygen tube trailed like a fragile tether. "Miss Hale," Isla said faintly. "Is something wrong?" Valerie rushed to her, kneeling so fast her knees struck the marble floor. She cupped Isla's fragile face, tears spilling. "Everything, Isla. Everything is wrong. And it's my fault." Her voice cracked like glass. "I spent years thinking children like you were just data points. I didn't see you. I didn't fight for you. I let others decide what lives were worth keeping. And now," she broke down completely. "Now you are the one paying the price." Isla's brow furrowed. She looked at Valerie, then at Alara, then back again. Finally, she whispered, "I don't want to live if it hurts people." The room seemed to stop breathing. Valerie clutched her tighter. "No, Isla. Don't ever think that. Your life is not a burden. It's the proof we must be better. You are not the reason people suffer. You are the reason I must change." Her voice faltered, but she forced herself onward, speaking as though confessing to the whole world. "I closed my eyes before. But you, Isla, you and Alara, you've made me open them." The child's small arms wrapped weakly around Valerie's neck, and something inside the CEO cracked open like a dam. She wept into Isla's hair, wept until the marble floor beneath her was darkened by drops of repentance. For the first time in years, Valerie Whitmore was no longer Halegenics' ironclad CEO. She was simply a woman kneeling before a child, finally seeing the truth she had spent a lifetime avoiding. And for the first time, she knew that salvation was not in control, but in surrender. Surrender to the very humanity she had long denied. The auditorium shimmered with light, banners rippling with the golden emblem of Halegenics' New Dawn initiative. Rows of dignitaries, investors, scientists, and families filled the hall, waiting for the grand proclamation. At the center of the stage stood a podium carved from polished oak, a microphone gleaming beneath the hot stage lights. Harrison Cole stood awkwardly off to the side, shoulders slightly hunched, hands folded in front of him. He wore his janitor's uniform, the fabric faded and frayed, yet ironed neatly. No medals adorned his chest, no title announced his sacrifice. The program director had tried to pin a ceremonial ribbon on him earlier, but he had politely removed it. Valerie stood nearby, radiant in a navy dress that gleamed under the lights. Yet her expression carried humility, not power. She had orchestrated this event, but she knew whose story must be told. The announcer spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, we honor a man whose quiet blood, whose sacrifice beyond measure, gave us not only life, but hope renewed. Please welcome Dr. Harrison Cole." The hall thundered with applause, but Harris winced. He shook his head, stepping toward the microphone. The clapping softened, then quieted as people leaned forward. His voice was calm, steady, humble. "I don't need titles. I was once a doctor. Then I was a soldier. Then I swept your floors. But none of that makes me more worthy than anyone else who has given what they had to save another." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. He caught sight of Alara in the front row, her eyes shimmering. His throat tightened. "I didn't give my blood for recognition," he said. "I gave it because someone needed it, because a child was dying, because that's what we do, what we're supposed to do." He stepped back from the podium, ready to retreat, but a small voice rang out. "Wait!" Alara rose from her seat. She clutched the microphone with both hands, standing on tiptoe to reach it. The audience hushed, curious. Harris froze, stunned by her boldness. Her voice was clear, trembling only slightly at first, but gathering strength with each word. "My father never needed anyone to call his name. He never asked for titles, or thanks, or applause. He always said, 'Being my dad was enough.'" A ripple of emotion passed through the crowd. "But today," Alara continued, her gaze sweeping the hall, "I will call his name, because the world deserves to hear it. Because heroes don't stay hidden in the shadows forever. Because sometimes the quietest men carry the loudest truths." She took a breath, her small hands gripping the podium like anchors. "My father's name is Harrison Cole. He gave his blood to save Isla Whitmore's life. He gave his heart to raise me when no one thought he could. And he gave his soul to a world that often forgot men like him existed." The hall fell utterly silent. Even the cameras, whirring softly, seemed to pause. Alara's voice rose, steady now, almost fierce. "He doesn't need to be remembered by medals or statues. He deserves to be remembered by love, and by the way we choose to live, seeing each other, helping each other, believing in each other." Her voice softened, breaking just slightly. "So today, I call his name, Harrison Cole, my dad, my hero." Applause erupted, not the polite kind that had filled the room earlier, but thunderous, rolling, heartfelt. People rose to their feet, clapping until the sound became a storm. Valerie's eyes glistened as she watched, her heart splitting open with gratitude and sorrow all at once. Harris stood still, overwhelmed. For years he had lived in silence, invisible, dismissed. And now, because his daughter spoke with a courage beyond her years, the world finally knew. He stepped toward her, lifted her gently into his arms, and whispered into her hair. "You didn't have to do that." Alara pressed her cheek against his shoulder. "Yes, I did, because the world needed to know what I've always known." The music swelled as the screen faded into a sequence of images that unfolded like memory and prophecy intertwined. Valerie in her office, the walls no longer lined with charts of profit margins, but with hand-drawn posters bearing the words, "The Alara Project." Children gathered in bright classrooms inside repurposed labs, their laughter echoing down corridors once filled with cold machinery. Researchers bent over microscopes, not to exploit blood, but to find cures. Every file began with a child's name, never a number. Harris sweeping the hospital floor, the same mop and bucket, the same worn uniform. Yet something was different. As he passed, nurses smiled, doctors nodded, patients waved. He was no longer invisible. He was seen, respected, honored, not because of what he demanded, but because of who he was. Alara running through the hospital garden with Isla, their laughter ringing like bells. Isla's cheeks glowed with color, her body stronger, her eyes brighter. She clutched the wooden box Alara had given her, holding it like a treasure. The two girls tumbled together onto the grass, giggling, unafraid of tomorrow. Valerie walking through the garden, pausing to watch them. Her expression carried both regret and peace. She lifted her gaze upward, as though silently promising the children yet to come. Never again. The montage slowed, the images folding back into the present. The hall, the applause, Harris still holding his daughter. As the ovation thundered on, Harris whispered to Alara, "I never needed the world to know my name." Alara looked at him with fierce devotion. "But I needed them to hear it." And in that moment, between a janitor who had once been a doctor, a CEO who had once closed her eyes, and a child who had forced them all to open, the world shifted. Not through power, not through wealth, not even through blood, but through truth spoken aloud. For Harrison Cole, the man who never asked to be named, was finally remembered, not as a savior, not as a soldier, not as a scientist, but as a father. And that was enough to change everything. The night settled softly over the city, the streets below glowing with scattered lights that twinkled like fallen stars. Inside the hospital, in a quiet room untouched by the noise of celebration, two girls sat by a wide window. The glass pane was cool beneath their fingers, and the world outside stretched vast, silent, and unknowable. Alara leaned her chin on her knees, curls tumbling over her shoulders. Isla, wrapped in a knitted blanket, looked pale but peaceful. Her illness had retreated, her breathing steadier now. For the first time in years, she felt the strength to simply sit and dream. They didn't speak at first. Words felt heavy after everything that had happened. The hearings, the revelations, the truth clawing its way into the light. But silence wasn't empty here. It was full. Full of the weight of survival, of choices, of things finally said aloud. Isla broke it softly, almost a whisper. "Alara, why is it that good people are always forgotten?" Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with the fragile honesty of a child asking the hardest question of all. Her gaze lingered on the city lights, as if she expected them to blink out at any moment. Alara turned to her, eyes thoughtful, her own small hands curling into fists. She thought of her father, of the mop in his hands, of the scars he never spoke of the quiet strength that had saved not only Isla but countless others. She thought of Valerie, standing alone in the aftermath, bearing the weight of her choices. She thought of all the nameless children in files and forgotten experiments, shadows without names. Finally, she said, "Maybe. It's because the world is too loud." She paused, her voice quivering like a violin string. Good people don't shout their own names. They don't demand to be seen. And sometimes, maybe the world hasn't learned how to listen yet. Isla's eyes shimmered. Then how will anyone remember them? Alara reached into her pocket, pulling out the little wooden box she always carried. She opened it, revealing the slip of paper her mother had left behind. The words etched like fire into her heart. "If you save someone by doing what is right, then you have already lived forever." She placed it gently into Isla's palm. "They're remembered," Alara said, "when we live what they taught us, when we keep their truth alive in how we treat each other. That's how the quiet ones last forever." Isla closed her hand around the paper, pressing it to her chest. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles, fragile yet unbreakable. In the hallway, unseen by the girls, Harris leaned against the doorframe. He watched them in silence, his face softened by pride and pain entwined. For years he had chosen invisibility, carrying his burdens alone, letting the world misjudge him as nothing more than a janitor. Now, as he watched Alara's courage ripple outward into Isla's heart, he realized something. Invisibility had never been defeat. It had been choice. And tonight, that choice had turned into legacy. Valerie stood beside him. She did not speak, but the lines of guilt carved into her expression had eased, replaced with something closer to reverence. She had once built empires on silence, on covering the sins of men who saw children as commodities. But Ilara's voice, Isla's resilience, and Harris's sacrifice had shattered that silence forever. For the first time, Valerie whispered, "I see them." Harris gave her a long look. His eyes did not accuse her, nor did they absolve. They simply acknowledged the truth. She had opened her eyes at last. Back in the room, Isla leaned against Ilara's shoulder, her breath slowing, her body relaxing in the simple peace of being alive. Together, the girls watched the city lights flicker against the horizon. "Do you think," Isla asked, "that people will remember us? Not just the pain, but who we are?" Ilara wrapped an arm around her. "They will, because we'll make sure they do. Not with shouting, not with power, but with truth." The girls sat in stillness, framed by the window, their silhouettes outlined by the pale glow of the moon. And though the city roared beyond them, here in this quiet corner, there was space enough to hear what mattered. The screen faded to black, leaving only the soft echo of children's laughter and the faint hum of the city at night. Then the voice came, calm and resonant, carrying the weight of all that had been revealed. They were once invisible. Their names were hidden, their lives reduced to numbers, their sacrifices erased. They walked among us like shadows, unthanked, unseen. But tonight, the silence was broken. A child's voice called a name. A father's truth was laid bare. A mother's guilt turned into redemption. And the world, loud, restless, forgetful, finally grew quiet enough to listen. Good people do not need to shout. They do not need to carve their names into stone. For when they live with truth, when they give with love, when they choose to heal instead of harm, then their memory cannot be erased. They were once invisible, but tonight the world called their names, and the echo will never fade. In the final image, Harris was shown sweeping the same polished hospital floors, Ilara walking beside him with her school bag bouncing against her side. Isla joined them, holding her wooden box close. Nurses and doctors passed by, pausing to nod, to smile, to greet him by name. No banner, no title, no medal, just recognition, simple and human. And as the screen faded to white, the words appeared. Harrison Cole, father, healer, remembered. The music swelled, tender and triumphant. And so, the story of Harris, Ilara, Valerie, and little Isla comes to a close. But before we part ways, may I ask, where are you watching from tonight? Is it a quiet small town, or a bustling city filled with lights? Share it below, so we may see how many hearts are listening together across the world. If this story touched you, I invite you to subscribe. Just one simple click, yet it helps us continue bringing more stories of hope, compassion, and healing. Thank you, truly, for spending your precious time with us. May peace and good health be with you, always, until we meet again in the next story.